It begins with a berry too bitter to eat. Across the Levant, the hills of the Jordan Valley, the slopes of Syria and southern Turkey, a wild tree called Olea europea grew for hundreds of thousands of years, scattering small, hard, oil-rich fruit that no animal much wanted. The tree meant almost nothing to people until they learned to unlock it. Around 6000 BCE, roughly 8,000 years ago, farmers near the eastern Mediterranean began doing exactly that. They noticed that some wild trees bore fatter, less bitter fruit, and they kept them. They discovered grafting, cutting a shoot from a prized tree and binding it onto rootstock, so a single good tree could be copied 1,000 times. A grove was no longer a gift of chance. It was a decision. The fruit itself resisted. Raw olives are packed with oleuropein, a compound so bitter the flesh is nearly inedible off the branch. But that same flesh holds up to 20% oil by weight, and oil could be freed by force. Early pressers crushed the fruit against stone basins, let the pulp settle, and skimmed the floating oil from the water beneath. At Kfar Samir, a site now submerged off the coast of modern Haifa, archaeologists found crushed olive pits and pressing installations dated to around 5800 BCE, among the oldest evidence of oil making anywhere. What they had made was extraordinary. Unlike grain, oil was liquid wealth. It burned in clay lamps, giving light long after sunset. It sealed and enriched food. It carried across months without spoiling if kept cool and covered. It could be rubbed on skin, worked into wounds, traded jar for jar. A tree that took a decade to mature rewarded patience for centuries. Olives still fruit on trunks 2,000 years old. Slowly, grove by grove, the domesticated olives spread west along the coasts. And when it reached a great island in the wine-dark sea, a palace civilization would take this humble oil and turn it into the first accounted fortune of Europe. By 2000 BCE, the olive had crossed to Crete, and on that island a civilization made it the engine of the first great economy in Europe. The Minoans, ruling from the sprawling palace of Knossos, built their wealth on oil. In the palace magazines, long, narrow storerooms, archaeologists uncovered rows of pithoi, ceramic jars taller than a man, each able to hold hundreds of liters. Knossos alone had storage for an estimated 250,000 liters of liquid produce, much of it olive oil, sealed against the Mediterranean heat. This was not oil for a single kitchen. It was oil as capital. When scribes at Knossos, and later at the Mycenaean palaces on the Greek mainland, pressed reed styluses into wet clay, they recorded it. The script was Linear B, an early form of Greek deciphered in 1952 by Michael Ventris. Its tablets list olive oil by the unit, tallying amounts issued to sanctuaries, to workshops, to gods named Zeus and Hera. Oil moved as rations, as offerings, as payment. A palace clerk at Pylos could tell you, to the measure, how much had gone out and how much remained. The oil did more than fill jars. Minoan and Mycenaean workshops blended it with coriander, rose and sage into perfumed oil, a luxury shipped in small stirrup jars stamped with their contents. These traveled to Egypt and the Levant, carrying Aegean scent across the sea. Ordinary oil lit the palace lamps, greased wool for spinning, and fed the elite who controlled its flow. Whoever held the storerooms held power. Then, around 1200 BCE, the palace world burned. Knossos, Pylos, and Mycenae fell in a wave of destruction that swept the eastern Mediterranean, and the Linear B tablets survived only because the fires that ended the palaces baked their clay hard. The administered oil economy vanished with the scribes. But the trees did not die. They stood in the abandoned groves, waiting for a new people to gather beneath them and give the olive a meaning richer than any ledger. When the Greeks rebuilt their world, they explained the olive not with a ledger, but with a goddess. The myth was set on the Acropolis of Athens. Two gods, Athena and Poseidon, competed to become the city's patron. Poseidon struck the rock and brought forth a spring of seawater. Athena planted an olive tree. The gods judged her gift the greater, a source of food, oil, and light, and the city took her name. A sacred olive, the Moria, was said to grow on the Acropolis still, and Athenians believed its offspring stood in the groves of Attica under the protection of Zeus. The tree became civic identity. Athenian law made cutting down a sacred olive a crime punishable by exile or death, tried before the city's highest court. The oil itself was a prize. At the Panathenaic Games, victors received not cash, but amphorae of oil pressed from the sacred trees. A single winner could carry off well over 100 large jars, each painted with Athena on one side and his event on the other. That oil was wealth a champion could sell across the Greek world. At Olympia, the honor was purer still. From 776 BCE, the games crowned their victors with the katinos, a wreath cut from a wild olive that grew behind the temple of Zeus. No money, no jar, only leaves. To be wreathed in olive was to be touched by the divine. Oil ran through daily Greek life as thoroughly as through myth. It burned in every clay lamp, the only reliable light after dark. It cooked the food and dressed the bread. In the gymnasium, athletes coated their bodies in oil before wrestling, then scraped it off with a curved bronze strigil, carrying away dust and sweat. Doctors, priests, and cooks all reached for the same jar. But Greece could not consume all the oil its groves produced, and its cities crowded a rocky, hungry coast. The surplus had to travel. Already, sharper traders than the Greeks were turning oil into something new, cargo, and profit on an unprecedented scale. They came from a thin strip of coast on the eastern Mediterranean, the cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos in what is now Lebanon. The Greeks called them Phoenicians, and from around 1200 BCE, it became the sea's great carriers, sailing farther and trading harder than anyone before them. Cedar, purple dye, glass, wine, and olive oil filled their holds. Where they went, the olive followed. Oil suited their trade perfectly. It was dense value in a sealed jar. A single amphora of oil could be worth a shipload of grain by weight, and it did not spoil on a long voyage. Phoenician ships carried it west in torpedo-shaped amphorae, hundreds stacked in a single hull. Wrecks like the Bajo de la Campana off southern Spain, dated to the 7th century BCE, still hold their cargo of jars. Oil became a portable currency, exchanged for silver from Iberia, tin from the Atlantic, ivory from Africa. But the Phoenicians did more than move oil, they planted it. As they founded trading posts along the coasts, they carried cuttings and know-how, seeding groves on shores that had never pressed an olive. Around 814 BCE, by tradition, colonists from Tyre founded Carthage on the North African coast near modern Tunis. Carthage grew into a power in its own right, and its territory became rich olive country. A Carthaginian writer named Mago composed a vast farming manual, its passages on the olive so valued that the Roman Senate later ordered the whole work translated into Latin. Phoenician and Carthaginian traders pushed the olive to Sicily, to Sardinia, to the coasts of Spain around Cadiz, Gadir, their westernmost city, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. They turned a Levantine tree into a Mediterranean one, ringing the sea with groves that fed a growing web of ports. By tying oil to silver and settlement, the Phoenicians proved it could be an empire's lifeblood. But it was a rival of Carthage, a city on the Tiber with a genius for scale, that would take that lesson and industrialize it, pressing oil by the millions of jars until an entire empire ran on it. Rome took the olive and made it an industry. Where Greeks pressed for their households and Phoenicians traded jar by jar, Rome organized oil on the scale of an empire of 60 million people. Its heartland of production lay in Baetica, the southern Spanish province along the Guadalquivir River around modern Seville and Córdoba. There, on great estates called latifundia, Thousands of laborers tended groves running to the horizon and pressed their fruit in purpose-built mills. The technology was serious. The trapidum, a mill of 2 curved stone hemispheres turning inside a basin, crushed the flesh while sparing the bitter pits. The press that followed used a massive wooden beam, weighted or winched down to squeeze the pulp. Later Romans added the screw press, described by Pliny the Elder in the 1st century CE, wringing out still more oil. An estate could turn out oil not by the jar but by the ton. Then Rome moved it. Vatican oil traveled in a heavy, round-bellied amphora archaeologist called Dressel 20, each holding around 70 liters and weighing, full, close to 100 kilograms. Barges carried them down the Guadalquivir to Seville, where they were loaded onto seagoing ships bound for Ostia, Rome's port. Stamps and painted inscriptions on the jars, the Tituli Picti, recorded the weight of the oil, the estate, the merchant, and the inspector, a paper trail in fired clay reaching back nearly 2,000 years. The volume is almost beyond belief. By some estimates, Rome consumed on the order of 30 million liters of olive oil a year. It fried and dressed food for rich and poor. It burned in the lamps of tenement and temple alike. It oiled the bodies at every public bath in the city. It went out with the legions, so a soldier on the Rhine or in Britain ate the same Spanish oil as a senator on the Palatine. An empire this hungry left a mark that could not be hidden. Downstream of every meal and every lamp lay the empty jars, and in Rome they were piling into a hill that still stands today, a mountain built entirely of the discarded vessels of liquid gold. Long before olive oil was merely food, it was light, medicine, and skin. In the terracotta lamps of nearly every Mediterranean household, a floating wick drank oil and burned it into a steady amber flame, the only reliable illumination for thousands of years. A single lamp consumed roughly its own small bowl of oil each night, and a working city like Athens burned through millions of liters a year just to hold back the dark. But the tree's gift reached deeper than the flame. Around 400 BC, Hippocrates of Kos cataloged more than 60 ailments treated with olive oil, cleaning wounds, soothing ulcers, easing fevers, calming the gut. 5 centuries later, the physician Galen of Pergamon built entire pharmacies around it, folding oil into ointments, plasters, and his famous cold cream of oil, wax, and rosewater. Oil carried herbs into the body. It was the solvent, the base, the vehicle of ancient medicine. The athletes knew it best. In the gymnasium and the palestra, wrestlers and runners coated their bodies in oil before training, both to warm the muscles and to guard the skin from sun and dust. When the workout ended, they scraped the whole mixture, oil, sweat, sand, and dead skin, off the body with a curved bronze tool called a stregel. The scrapings, known as gloyos, were collected and sold as a salve. Nothing was wasted. And oil made a person beautiful. Steeped with iris, myrrh, or marjoram, it became perfume, poured from delicate juglets called aryballoi that hung from an athlete's wrist. Mixed with ash and lye, it edged towards soap. Rubbed into hair and skin, it was cosmetic and status alike. A body that gleamed with scented oil announced leisure and wealth. From the sickbed to the wrestling ground to the perfumer's shelf, olive oil was the ancient world's universal substance, as much chemistry as cuisine. But someone had to move it, to press it by the millions of jars and ship it across the sea. And the sheer scale of that trade would leave behind a monument you can still climb today, a mountain built entirely from shattered pots. To feed a city of 1 million people, Rome needed olive oil by the ocean. It arrived in AMPHORAE, fat, round clay jars of the Dressel 20 type, each holding about 70 liters of oil and weighing, empty, some 30 kilograms. They came mostly from Baetica in southern Spain and from North Africa, hauled up the Tiber to the warehouses of the capital. But these jars had a fatal flaw. The porous clay soaked up oil, went rancid, and could not be cleaned or reused. Once emptied, they were garbage. So the Romans threw them away in one place, methodically, for nearly 3 centuries. The result stands in Rome today as Monte Testaccio, a hill 50 meters high and a kilometer around, built entirely from the smashed fragments of an estimated 53 million oil amphorae. Workers stacked the broken sherds and terraced walls and sprinkled lime to kill the stench of rancid oil. It is, quite literally, a mountain of packaging, the ancient world's largest surviving record of a single commodity. Those stamped handles tell the whole story. Many amphorae carry painted inscriptions, the tituli pictae, noting the weight of the oil, the name of the shipper, the estate, and the year, a custom system written in ink. Archaeologists can date the hill layer by layer, watching Spanish oil pour into Rome under one emperor after another, peaking in the 2nd century AD. Oil on this scale was not just commerce, it was power. Under the annona, the state grain and oil supply, emperors handed out free or subsidized rations to the Roman populace. Around AD 200, the Emperor Septimius Severus added a daily distribution of olive oil to the existing dole of bread. To give the people bread and oil was to buy their loyalty, panem et oleum, beneath the more famous circuses. Whoever controlled the groves and the shipping lanes controlled the mood of the mob. Oil had become an instrument of the state itself. And that same precious liquid, poured from the same kind of jars, was about to be lifted onto the altar, no longer to feed the body, but to sanctify it. When a substance can light the dark, heal the sick, and preserve the dead, it is only a short step to calling it holy. Across the ancient Near East, olive oil was poured over the heads of kings and priests to mark them as chosen. In the Hebrew scriptures, the prophet Samuel anoints David king by emptying a horn of oil over him. The very word Messiah, and its Greek echo Christos, means simply the anointed one. Oil made a man sacred. The temple ran on it. In Jerusalem, the menorah of the Second Temple burned pure, hand-pressed olive oil, and the festival of Hanukkah remembers a single day's supply of it, said to have lasted 8. In synagogues, a lamp was kept perpetually lit, the Ini Tamid, the eternal flame, fed for centuries on olive oil. The same soft light that filled kitchens now filled the house of God. Oil accompanied the dead as well. Mediterranean burials from Egypt to Etruria included jars of scented oil poured over the body or left in the tomb to ease the passage into the next world. Small oil flasks, the lekithoi of Greece, were placed in graves by the thousands. To be buried without oil was to be sent off poor. Early Christianity carried the ritual forward and deepened it. Believers were anointed at baptism and, when dying, received the oil of the sick. By the early centuries AD, the church blessed a special perfumed oil called chrism, olive oil mingled with balsam, used to consecrate bishops, altars, and the newly baptized. To be sealed with chrism was to be marked as belonging to God. From coronation to grave, the olive tree governed the great thresholds of human life. For thousands of years, then, one liquid had fed, healed, lit, cleansed, and sanctified an entire civilization. The question was whether it could survive the fall of the empire that had spread it so far. When Rome collapsed and the great estates crumbled, the groves themselves would have to find new keepers, and they did, in the quiet hands of monks and villagers who refused to let the presses go cold. When the Western Roman Empire dissolved in the 5th century AD, the vast oil estates and the long sea routes broke apart with it. The AMPHORAE stopped climbing the Tiber. Monte Testaccio grew no higher. Yet the trees did not die. Olive groves, unlike empires, do not fall in a single generation. A well-tended tree can live 500, 1,000, even 2,000 years. And some olives standing today were already old when Rome was young. Through the Middle Ages, the keepers of the flame were the monasteries. In the cloisters of Italy, Spain, and Provence, monks pressed oil for their own lamps, their kitchens, and the chrism of their altars, recording harvests in ledgers, and repairing the stone presses their predecessors had cut. Around them, Mediterranean villages did the same on a smaller scale, each household bringing its olives to a shared mill, filling clay jars for the year, pruning trees their grandparents had planted. The knowledge of grafting, pressing, and storing passed down unbroken, hand to hand, winter after winter. And so the thread was never cut. The trapetum gave way to the beam press to the screw press, the screw at last to the hydraulic ram and the stainless steel centrifuge. But the fruit, and the gesture of crushing it, stayed the same. The oil that a Minoan poured into a Pythos at Knossos, that a Greek victor wore at Olympia, that Rome shipped by the millions of jars and the church raised over kings, is the same oil pressed this autumn in Andalusia, Puglia, and the Peloponnese, and poured from a bottle onto bread tonight. It is a single, unbroken story, 8,000 years long, running from a bitter wild berry on a Levantine hillside to the green gold liquid on a modern table, without a break. No other commodity has fed, lit, healed, and blessed a civilization for so long, or bound so many distant shores into one shared world. Follow the oil, and you follow the making of everything around it. Across 3,000 years of kitchens, temples, ships, and empires, one truth holds above all. Olive oil built the Mediterranean world.